Coppinger, who is sharing.
Yeah, sharing time with Deputy Boyd Barrett. Taoiseach and Minister, I'm going to begin with a quote about the financialisation of housing. Housing and urban real estate has become the commodity of choice for corporate finance, a safety deposit box for the wealthy, with profound consequences for those in need of adequate housing. The quote is not from the Socialist Party or any left-wing outlet. It's the UN Special Rapporteur. And it definitely applies to Ireland, and yesterday's budget added further incentive for that process to take place, because with the measures that you took. Now, Irish REIT, I'm sure the Minister is well familiar with, they were encouraged to come into this country. Under the previous Labour Fine Gael government, it was remarkable. The previous Speaker was in government up to about 2.5 years ago. But they bought, for example, 10 sites in the 2013 period in Dublin. In one of those sites, Lansdowne Gate in Drimna, since 2014 they've put up the rents by 40%. In Priors Gate in Tala, they've put up the rent by 31%. We heard at the weekend they had similar plans for other residents, and thankfully, and I salute the residents of that building for taking their protest directly to Irish REIT and forcing them back. Irish REIT got a huge leg up from you yesterday, Minister, when they've already been exempt from corporate capital gains tax to the tune of 30 million, which would, just so you're aware, build 200 houses. And now yesterday, the likes of Irish REIT and other landlords, because we've heard a lot about granny flats and granny grants from the Independent Alliance. Granny flats and granny grants can be availed of by the likes of Irish REIT and these, huge corporate funds who are already swooping in to buy up property in Ireland. We also hear this cliché trotted out again and again about landlords exiting the sector. There's been a massive increase in the number of people who live in the private rented sector. I'm absolutely neutral on the question of how many landlords are in the sector, but I know many more people are living in the sector. And why wouldn't they? Because landlords in Ireland make twice what they make in Britain or Germany, and they make the highest profits in the whole of the EU. So I don't know why. Now, yesterday you had a choice. You could have decided, yes, there is an issue with some landlords not renting out their properties, not keeping them vacant. There's two ways of dealing with that. You either give them a tax break or you tax them. And you opted to give them a tax break. In yesterday's budget, I think everybody in the country was waiting. This was to be the housing budget. We heard from Fianna Fáil, we heard from Fine Gael. This was going to be all about housing. And it wasn't all about housing, because despite being the biggest crisis in society, where the future of children is being stolen from them, the future of young people is being stolen from them, where many young people are stuck at home, and where many workers are paying massive rents. Yesterday you chose to again incentivise landlords and incentivise the landlord sector. Now, there is a problem in this, Dáil. We have to say people should declare an interest before they... Sorry I'm boring you so much over there, but this is our opportunity, our leader's slot to speak. Well, you're not actually, but anyway. The point that I was going to make is that we have a massive conflict of interest in this, Dáil. 1 in 4 TDs are landlords, but actually 1 in 3 TDs in Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are landlords, so it's an even higher concentration. And yet every single day you're making policies and you're voting on policies that actually benefit yourselves. It's just an added problem that we have, that people seem to be divorced from the reality. The population who are landlords in this country is 4%, but it's 25% in here, and that's not a problem. In Rebuilding Ireland, you announced that you were going to build 9,000 plus units. Yesterday you announced 10,000. If the Minister can clarify, is it an increase of 400 social houses or not? Is it just a repackaging of Rebuilding Ireland? And 16 houses were built in Dublin City in the recent period, so there's no question. How is this going to be suddenly ramped up? But most of the money that you're talking about is 121 million to HAP landlords directly into the pockets of the private sector again. The tax relief on buildings and on renovations will definitely encourage more of the likes of Irish REIT and those investment funds to come into the country, to do up properties, potentially evict people, but also ratchet up rents again, because it is a legitimate ground for putting up rent, and could actually see an increase in rents. In the figures that the Minister announced, there was 70,000 social housing solutions mentioned, not social houses, of course. People don't get social houses very much anymore. But up to 50,000 of them were through the HAP programme. Now, last night on television, the Minister said, well, what do we do? This is an interim measure. This is a measure that was being debated in here just after I got elected in the by-election in 2014. So it's a 4-year policy, it's not an interim measure. It was started off by Deputy O'Sullivan when she was Housing Minister. I also wanted to ask the Minister about the Rainy Day Fund. I mean, what do you envisage that being used for? Because the rules of the fiscal rules for the EU make it clear that such funds can only be used for external shocks. So, major things like a bank bailout or whatever. Why would that money not be used for housing? Or do you not think it's wet enough and rainy enough for the tens of thousands who are in housing unaffordability? Just also wanted to ask what the Minister has against young people, because we know that young people are really paying a huge price because of the housing crisis. Some of the figures that USI has given would show this in terms of rents, but also in terms of the fees that students have been forced to pay and the contribution costs. Under the previous government and under this government, student contributions rose by 263%. It was €800 odd back in 2007 when the crisis began, and it's now 3,000. And it's students who have to fund that. We also have the 4th highest rate of suicide among young men is in Ireland, the 4th highest rate in the world, which is obviously contributed to by stress, housing problems, and such things like this. It's now estimated that the average age for buying a house is 36. Years of age, and it's a 35-year mortgage potentially on those young people. So you can see how and why that young people are engaging in protests such as Take Back the City. And the only message, to be honest, that anyone could take who is engaging in those and getting politically active on the issue of housing, which many young people are, usually it actually is the people who took part in the repeal movement, who've been politicised by that, who've been given confidence by that and by the successful fight for marriage equality, who now see that they have to turn their attention to the biggest problem that they face, which is housing. And the message they have to take from yesterday is the protests have to continue and the ante has to be upped. We definitely need a massive protest, not a midweek protest, but a massive Saturday protest. Hopefully that will happen soon with the Raise the Roof campaign, but also a continuation of peaceful civil disobedience and occupations of housing on a major scale, because it seems to be the only time that the media, but also this government, just isn't listening. I wanted to just mention as well climate change. Of all of the issues that have been remarked on in the last 24 hours since the budget was brought in, be it on social media or by emails into the office, it is the lack of action on climate change. It was reported over the last few days that we've 12 years potentially left to resolve this problem before, serious doomsday, environmental doomsday scenario. The only thing that you mentioned yesterday was forestry, and as has been mentioned by Deputy Boyd Barrett yesterday, we must ensure that it's not a continuation of the current forestry policy, which is actually causing a lot of environmental problems. It has to be indigenous and a diverse range of trees. The meagre gas vehicles measure or hybrid vehicles measure that was mentioned. I mean, Minister, why not something like a massive investment in public transport? That's the second biggest sector that's adding to our CO2 emissions, or even considering what they have considered in other countries, free public transport, to encourage people to get out of their cars. Unfortunately, you know, you just didn't avail of that opportunity at all. Just finally to say that we keep hearing, or we would have heard heretofore, but it's not obviously an answer now. In the last 10 years, the money isn't there, etc. The money is definitely there now. I mean, $1 billion was found over the weekend in extra corporation tax receipts, and it's anticipated it'll be an extra 300 or 400 million next year because of some of the tax changes that have been made. But we already know that there is a fund there in terms of the strategic investment fund that should be used for housing. It's going to be put away at a time when people really need it. The Apple money as well, there's massive wealth in society that could be used to resolve the issues, but it was a landlord's budget from a landlord's stall.